Hello, welcome to Zero Hanger's Trade Target Series, where today's episode will be covering Richmond and 5 potential players they could look to lure to Punt Road at the off-season. To do that with me is Zero Hanger reporter Frank Seal. Frank, how are you, mate?
Good, thank you, Mitch. How are you?
I'm good. I'm keen to get into this one because Richmond, we don't really know what their list might look like come 2025, just given not only the number of players they have unsigned for next year, but the calibre of players and the premiership stalwarts that they have without deals and potential rival interest. And obviously at the moment holding pick 1 is, I guess, for some in some way Richmond fans will be quite excited. But and how they kind of attack the draft and who they get. But that first selection, on top of a hand they already have that's quite strong, could be accompanied by 3-4 first round picks by the end of the trade period. And as we head towards the draft, but between then, there certainly could be some options for them to add to their list if they lose. The likes of Liam Baker, Dustin Martin, Daniel Rioli is a bit of more of a question mark. Jack Graham's a free agent. Dion Prestio, a free agent. Dylan Grimes, we're not really sure where his future sits given his injury and contract status. So there is a lot to play out over the next few months for Adam Uze's side. But there certainly could be some options for them with the amount of draft capital they bring in. If they want to use it all in November, then I think that's certainly going to help with a push, but it certainly could also give them a leg up in trade negotiations if they want to lure some, maybe emerging, experienced or top line talent that is able to have an instant impact or a quicker impact. Maybe not instant, but already has a few years, in the system and could certainly help in that case. So let's jump straight into the list. And the first one's one that I've thought about as a pretty perfect target for the Tigers if they, can get, a first round pick in return for Liam Baker, which you'd expect should he depart. They could get 1 or 2 late first round picks for Dan Rioli from the Suns if that move does come to fruition. And I think those kind of pieces, we're not going to be moving pick 1 on or pick 2 or whatever it is. But those kind of pieces, and one of them could be used on someone like Elijah Tsatas at Essendon. I think a former top 5 pick, really struggling to break into Essendon's midfield while contracted for the next couple of seasons, and a contract he signed actually earlier this year. You would like to think that there is an offer there that could suit all parties. Tsatas moves to a club where he's going to get some starting minutes. He's not going to be, 8th or 9th in the pecking order. Essendon get probably a pretty decent return, a first round pick, maybe early to mid-teens, that is probably could be the best they're going to get. Like they do have to think what Tsatas is going to be like in 12 months' time if his level of development keeps up. And Richmond get a pretty a midfielder who still has a high ceiling, just needs some games under his belt.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot of sort of young talent to look forward to within Richmond's list, especially in the midfield. So this would be the start to building some sort of future, which would be big, especially pick 5 or whatever he's taken at. He could thrive under the sort of leadership and the talent of Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper, the new recruits. But he would also be leaving Zach Merritt, who's probably the best leader, or definitely the best leader and player amongst that group of players. He'll obviously take time to become a mainstay in the Bombers midfield. They've got Merritt, they've got Durham, Caldwell, Darcy Parish is going to come back, Ben Hobbs is going to come back. So it's concern somewhat there, but he's only 19. In saying that, he hasn't really fired a shot yet at all in his AFL career. He's only averaged 12 disposals. He's only had 1 game over 20. That was against North Melbourne last year. He clearly is a silky ball user, him just from the limited time that we've seen. Could be damaging going forward, inside 50 that is. It'd shift the dynamic of Richmond's young crop and their young talent and their potential, but the question is how significantly.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting one. They'll still be able to rely on a Taranto and Hopper, and whether Presti has another year, whether Jack Graham stays, Dusty's the other one, and Baker's the other one. So there's a lot to play out. But yeah, I think Tsatas certainly gets much more of a role than compared to what he gets at Essendon. And I think the development at the moment for him has really stunted his growth. Just comes in, maybe starts as sub or is subbed off, and it's really hard to get, I guess, that clean trajectory and rise when you're really lacking in minutes and opportunity. Probably just doesn't look like the kind of player that we saw at the Oakley Chargers when he was drafted a couple of years ago, and certainly unfortunate, but he certainly still has the potential. His VFL efforts are still quite strong for a teenager. We've got to remember that. But yeah, it's just an interesting one that if Richmond wanted to build a midfield that kind of eventually takes over from the Taranto and Hopper contingent, then they've got a Tsatas, and they've probably got whoever they pick up with pick 1 is likely to be a midfielder, or pick 2 or whatever. A Jagger Smith, a Josh Smiley, those type of guys, and then they've got some other emerging midfielders that they could look at the draft or even on their list already. So certainly one for, I guess, them to consider. Like I said, a bit of an outside move given his contract status, but one I would like to think certainly would work for all parties involved. The other one, and the next one on our list, this is probably the left field option. We usually have one of these per trade targets piece, and it's Dan Houston, who supposedly according to AFL.com, there is some suggestion that a move back to his home state of Victoria could be on the cards despite his contract status. Signed a long-term deal, I think last year or the year before, and one of the best players at Port Adelaide, and All-Australian at that as well. So there is certainly going to be a few clubs lining up if a move back home is on the cards, and I don't know why Richmond wouldn't rule themselves out. Yes, maybe working themselves through a list build, but when you mention potential midfield void alongside Taranto and Hopper, and Houston's ability, I think, to potentially get more out of him as a midfielder, understandably can't quite break into that role given Rosie, Horn-Francis, and Butters and Wines and Boak and Drew. I think he certainly could be a pretty nice option for them off halfback and maybe more so in midfield. They'd have the draft capital to bring him over. They're not giving up their top pick, but they could have 3 or 4 other first round selections to use, and potentially have the best hand to satisfy Port Adelaide. He's under contract, so the Power don't have to let him go. But if there's an offer that they can't refuse, or if that would be quite promising for them, Richmond might be the best suitor.
Yeah, it's a long shot for Richmond, but a dramatic boost to their list if they can pull it off somehow. Daniel Rioli might be out as well, so that's one to consider. That would be an upgrade in pretty much all aspects. He's a better interceptor, better kick, bigger threat going inside 50, not as much of a runner as Rioli, but obviously compensates for that. Could provide some nice guidance and would combine nicely with Tom Brown being that young interceptor or defender who's a really nice kick as well. Obviously All-Australian last year, and he's having a near identical season this year in terms of production. 23 disposals, 5 marks, 5 intercepts, 5 score involvements, slightly more score involvements than he had in 2023. You said the midfield. I hadn't even thought about that, but that could be an exciting prospect if he were to do that. He'd probably, if he joins Richmond, arguably their second best player on their list behind Shea Bolton. Maybe they've got Hopper and Taranto, obviously, but he might go ahead of them. He's only 27 years old, but the only problem is it's hard to see him eyeing off Richmond as his target to want to go there.
Yeah, that is the big question: is if he wants to be into a contending club, which you'd like to think, and I think there's going to be a couple of those that would be of interest. But I think if Richmond's midfield has often been discussed as a bit, probably needs an extra gear. Taranto and Hopper, probably not that run through the midfield that they're like, and that's probably why they don't mind Bolton in there or Bacon in there to offer some outside help. But I think, Houston could be the perfect fit. They'd have the draft capital, could satisfy Port Adelaide. That's 3 of the 4 boxes ticked, but the last one, as you mentioned, is where Houston wants to go. But I'm of the assumption, or of the view that if you're contracted and you want to go to a certain state, that you probably shouldn't have
be picky.
Yeah, be too picky, and that whatever works for your club should be really how the deal gets done. But obviously, that's just not how it works. The next couple on our list are also more midfield depth players in the right age range, off contracts. Certainly could do with better opportunities at AFL level, and I think they certainly have some more to give. And the first one of that is North Melbourne's Will Phillips.
Yeah, so I like Tsatas, a relatively unproven talent, but not as unproven as Tsatas. Obviously, again, would boost their future midfield prospects. He does have a proven ability to tag and to do some damage on the other end, as he did against Nick Dacos, kicking some goals against him earlier this year in that iconic comeback win for Collingwood. His career best performance was also against the Pies last year. He had 29 disposals and 5 tackles, so that's if you can do something similar to that for Richmond, that's a positive, obviously. He's only 22, he averages 14 disposals, pretty underwhelming compared to other top 10 picks, let alone pick 3. Obviously doesn't seem to be a big part of Alistair Clarkson's future plans with LDU, Wardlaw, Sheasel, Simpkin, even Tom Powell, and obviously McKercher all earning more minutes and probably going to roll through the midfield in future years. But a tough call may come for him eventually. So do the club and Will Phillips rip the band-aid off now and send him to Richmond?
Yeah, well, if the Tigers are in the market for young midfielders who could be available and might not come at much cost, then Phillips could be one. Like you said, there is some room there for him to grow into. Has obviously struggled with his role to be a tagger, but you certainly want to be more than that. Every club needs one, but I think every club can make a tagger almost out of nothing these days. And then at the same time, what did North Melbourne view a player that they used a top 5 draft selection or not that long ago? Obviously, they know maybe his ceiling and where it's at, and they could be open to a low value trade. So that's one that Richmond certainly could consider. I think if they have enough draft capital that they can use something in the trade space instead. Second one is Jai Culley. As we know, mid-season pick 1 selection a couple years ago, and one who has faced some setbacks during his short time with the Eagles, but one who is also unsigned for 2025. Victorian, taken at pick 1 by the Eagles, who said that he's probably worth a first rounder at that year's draft. If they didn't have that avenue to get him in midway through the year, and he was available in the national draft, they'd probably a back end first round selection, early second round selection perhaps. So, and I think I don't think the knee setbacks really done him too much harm from a value perspective. Obviously, it's just limited his development a little bit, but he's putting up some pretty good numbers at the waffle level, and I think it's just very hard for him to thrive when he's not able to be on that top line of their midfield group in a side that certainly struggles most weekends.
Yeah, so we've gone 3 for 4 with the young, unproven midfielders for Richmond's trade targets, which is nice. And they'd probably be hoping for the same thing as they would for Tsatas or Phillips. He's got a different journey to them, obviously. Mid-season pick 1, as you mentioned, thrown from his hometown in Melbourne to Perth. But he's a young player. He's only 21, little experience under his belt. He is injury plagued like the other 2 as well, so that's something to keep an eye on. Only 11 games, but he has shown a little bit. He's fiery, he's aggressive, loves tackling, but averages just 10 disposals a game. Obviously hoping for that to lift the more development he gets under his belt. Could be in West Coast's future plans, but it wasn't in favour under Adam Simpson, and he did struggle against St Kilda in their most recent outing, having just 7 touches and 2 tackles. Could fit the Richmond sort of fiery and aggressive mould that they have built over the last decade or so, and probably wouldn't cost a heap, so it's worth considering.
Yeah, I always think about his season before the season that he got drafted with Dandenong and his couple of performances with the Young Guns. Just a very damaging in attack with his ball use, and as we've seen at AFL level, good tackling numbers as well. So I think you can offer a lot on both ends. Wouldn't come at much cost, you'd think, either. And certainly might consider a move to Victoria if a club like Richmond put their hand up and said, hey, we need some probably midfield talent in our pecking order, and Culley could be one. The other area for Richmond is their key positions, Docs. It's kind of interesting to see how they might shape up round 1 next year. If you assume everyone's fit, they'll have Gibkiss and Tom Lynch back. Tyler Young will be available. So you're probably leaning towards Noel Bolter being a forward, I think. They have Samson Ryan, they have Jacob Kajitsky, they have McKelty Lafau, who's probably more of a fourth kind of tall option, medium-sized tall option. And then in backline, they're going to have Gibkiss, they'll have Young, they'll have Ben Miller. So it's kind of hard to know exactly where Bolter plays. You think maybe as a forward, I think he's shown enough and would certainly show more if he's got Tom Lynch by his side and another third tall to take away a defender and that amount of attention. So I think they still might look at a forward, someone cheap. And the reality is this year that whether it's key defenders or key forwards, there aren't a lot of great value out there. Yeah. If you're a club that wants one, you're probably looking at the contracted crop and having to pay up more than market price. But look, one who isn't contracted for next year, has shown something at AFL level and is currently out of favour, so therefore might not be the most expensive on the open market, is Ash Johnson at Collingwood. His teammates Nathan Kruger and Reef McInnes are also unsigned. You'd think just the way that we've seen from Collingwood this year and at their selection is that Johnson might be the least favoured of the three, and that maybe there is something that the Tigers could reach out for there and just add to their depth. As we've seen, we're not expecting the injuries that they've had this year to be repeated ever probably, but if it does come to them needing to rely on reinforcements or at least have some decent selection competition, then Johnson I think would be pretty nice, and has also shown he can play backline as well at VFL level, so maybe there's a bit of versatility for them to look at there as well.
Yep, well, somewhat risky given his recent form. It's been quite poor this year, and their inclusion of Jacob Kosicki. You don't want to sort of stack your list with VFL level forwards if they can't scrape the list. Obviously, Richmond compromised there because they're one of the worst teams in the AFL. And he's nearly 27, which surprised me. I thought he was younger than that.
Yeah, so he was a mature recruit.
Yeah, so there's not a lot of glaring potential to sort of wait for with Ash Johnson. He seems sometimes he gets lost easily, especially if he's playing that sort of second or third fiddle role. So maybe their best bet if they were to get him is to just make him the main man and just lift his confidence, give him the license to compete and fly for everything. Because we've seen some of the tricks he can pull off and some of the games he can play. But maybe Mikelti Lafau could be that because he's been very impressive for the games that he has played this year, but he'll miss the first half of 2025 pretty much. So could be worth a shot there. Ash Johnson did kick 21 goals last year, and as I mentioned, he's got some tricks. Took that big hanger against Carlton, kicked some ridiculous banana goals in 2022, including in that final, which many would remember.
Yeah.
So sort of contradicting myself. There's not much to be excited about, but there's also a lot to be excited about if they bring in Ash Johnson. So one to watch there.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Tigers fans won't like to hear this, but you can't be certain about Tom Lynch next year.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not his future necessarily, but how healthy he's going to be.
Yeah.
Recent history is going to suggest that he's not going to be playing every game next year. He might not return again this season, and ideally a full preseason gets him in good stead for the entirety of 2025. But there's just no guarantees there. So this kind of level of depth, and like I said, if Johnson can also be used behind the ball, given his just aerial capabilities and kicking as well, then I don't know why you couldn't just bring him over for next to nothing. And at the same time, it probably just gives Noah Bolter some ability to be versatile as well, and Johnson can take whatever end he's not at. So just again, probably a different one to consider, but at the moment, the key position market isn't all too punchy, I guess, if you're a club that's looking to add some height at either end. That will wrap up our Richmond trade targets series. We'll look at the Saints next, which will be quite an interesting one to come next week. And obviously, you can catch all the latest on zerohanger.com and on our YouTube page.